fancy I am today. I mean, I'm still not wearing makeup and in my pajamas, but I'm sitting on a chair instead of the floor, which is a major improvement for the beginning of these videos. I'm actually sitting here because I just finished filming a video about what's behind me. Can you guess? It might be about books, but you won't know for another month or two. So in this video, I was working on my 1860s ball gown. I was also working on a 1790s dress. I trimmed a straw hat, and I started on 2 new projects, and I also started on a new headpiece. So it was a whole bunch of different things, but it was quite fun, and I really hope you enjoy seeing the progress of how they came along. And if you want more information about these projects, then check out the description box because I will have a relevant blog post link down below. And I think that's all I'm going to say for now because I know this video is going to be really long, so I'm just going to get right into it.
Hello everyone! So I had not planned on filming this week at all, but I was suddenly in the mood for it and I realized that today might be kind of an interesting day to film since I'm going to be bouncing between projects. I'm trying to convince myself not to start on a new project. I found this velvet when I was cleaning up the other day, and it's a black velvet and then it has glittery little stars on it. I only have a yard of it, which I don't think is going to be enough for a jacket, but I'm kind of hoping it will be. And if it is, then I'm probably going to start on this costume, even though I have enough things in progress, and I've made a couple things quite similar to it this year. I just really want to make it, and I feel like I should follow that enthusiasm. The other reason I want to do this is because if you saw my last vlog, then you'll know that I had a failed attempt at making a skirt to go with my 1860s project, and I think I might transform that failed attempt into a velvet skirt to go with this jacket. So that's my plan, and we'll see if that ends up happening. I also have this 1790s dress in progress, and boy, this was a beast to make. The bodice gave me a lot of trouble, but now it's almost done. I have the yellow skirt attached, and I have the bodice finished. So now all I need to do is finish the underskirt, which is what this white panel is part of. Right now it's just pinned in place, but I have to hem it and sew it onto the back panel, and then sew it onto the waist. So that's going to be happening this week. And I'm also going to put my Civil War era dress on my dress form today, pin the bows onto the skirt, and hopefully finish the waistband of the skirt or get the back edge finished or something. I just want to move forward with that and get it closer to completion. So I think that's it for now. I've just ironed a few pieces of scrap fabric and I'm going to get to draping, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. So here's the draped pattern. I don't know how I feel about it. It's kind of weird since it doesn't have a lapel or a collar. I'm really worried it's going to resemble evening jackets from like the 1980s or sort of modern mother of the bride attire, more so than a historical garment from the 1890s. Hopefully it'll work out. I'm going to transfer it to paper and clean up all these little scallopy things and make it nice and pretty. And then I turned what I draped into a pattern, and I'll be making a mock-up for this later today, but I'm going to set it aside for now and work a little bit on my Civil War era evening gown. So here's the Civil War era evening gown. I need to steam the petticoat that's underneath this since it's really collapsed and it doesn't have nearly the amount of volume that I want it to have. But for now it's fine, and I'm going to go ahead and pin the bows onto the join points between the scalloped panels. And there's also a small gap at the back of the skirt that I'm going to cover with a piece of ruffled lace. So I want to mark out where that goes while it's on my dress form. You can't really tell from this angle, but I finished sewing all the bows onto this, and I also marked where I need to turn the back edge over. So hopefully I'll be able to sew that in place and do up the back seam later today. But in the meantime, I'm going to make a quick little mock-up of the pattern I drafted earlier today. And then I'm going to get some lunch, and I'm going to come back upstairs and film myself getting into my cycling costume for a spotlight video. I'm off to a good start this morning. I just trimmed the back panels and I cut off about 6 inches of each panel. And then I covered the edges with lace tape so they won't fray, and I sewed that on by hand. It took me quite a while to do since I was doing it by hand, but it was actually faster to do it by hand than by machine since the skirt is very, very heavy and it's difficult to get through my machine. But I just wanted to show you what it looks like on the dress form. My petticoat is collapsed a lot just because of the way I have to store it. So unfortunately it doesn't have as much volume as it should, and the scalloped panels don't all lay flat. Some of them have pleats in them. Other than that little problem, I'm really happy with how it looks. I did at the back seam, as you can see, and then there's an opening so I can get it over my head. And I have this little gap where the scalloped panels don't meet. and the lace ends. So I'm going to use a little bit of this lace, which I have left over, and sew a bit of that there, and then sew the bow over top of it. You won't even be able to tell. And whatever Chantilly lace I have left over after doing that is going to go on the back of the bodice because it has a gap on it as well. So I finished the back of the skirt. I sewed on the lace and the bow, and it looks perfectly fine. So I'm really happy with how well that went. Now I'm going to go ahead and make another bow for the bodice, and I'm also going to cut the waistband out of these scraps I cut from the back of the skirt. I do have some rectangles already cut out for the bow since I was planning on making 6 for the skirt, and I think I only needed 5, but I need to sew lace onto it, and I have to cut out the center and get it all assembled. So that'll take me a little bit. This fabric is like comically wrinkly right now. If you didn't see my first post about making this costume, it's actually made out of a cotton sateen that's intended for bed sheets, so it's really, really thin and really prone to wrinkling, and it was not a good choice for this project. But I bought it several years ago, and at the time when I purchased it, I really didn't realize how problematic it would be. Anyway, I made a waistband and I just sewed it on with a 3/4 inch seam allowance, and now I'm going to fold it in half so this edge touches the stitch line on the back of the fabric, and it's going to get whip stitched in place, and then the finished waistband will be a little bit more than 1 inch wide. I was originally going to bind this raw edge and have it tucked under and the waistband on top of it, but this actually isn't a very bulky edge, so it should be okay in the waistband and it shouldn't make my waist look that much larger. So I finished making the bow for the bodice, and now I have to sew hooks onto it, and then I'll sew little loops onto the back of the bodice. So after it's laced up, the bow can hook in place and you won't see this gap in the lace. And so obviously this isn't laced up, but I sewed the hooks on and now the bodice is complete. So I'm going to set this aside for now and work on the skirt. So I finished whip stitching the bottom edge of the waistband, so now it's finished aside from closures. And I think I'm probably going to have to put a couple snaps here to close this opening as well, but it sort of depends how it falls over the petticoats when it's worn. And to figure that out, I'm going to go ahead and put on my corset and my petticoats and my farthingale and see how it looks. I'm kind of nervous to try it on. I haven't tried it on since I added the scallop portions, which made the skirt quite a bit heavier, and I haven't tried it on since my petticoat collapsed. So I'm not sure how good it's going to look, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed and feeling kind of hopeful. And since I'm getting all dolled up and lacing myself into stuff, I thought I'd go ahead and try on the mock-up for the velvet jacket, which I made the other day. So last night I tried on my skirt and it didn't go that well because of the way I've been storing the petticoats, which is either in a plastic bin outside my sewing room or hanging up over here. There's been a lot of weight put on the waistline and it's just completely collapsed. So it has significantly less volume now than it did when I first made it, and because of that it started to drag slightly on the ground, which is okay, I can still walk in it, it's fine, but once the skirt goes over top, the weight of it causes it to collapse more, and it ends up being too long and not really having the silhouette I wanted. I can't really hem the skirt because then the petticoat would show, and I can't really hem the petticoat because it's massive and there are just way too many layers to take up. So I'm going to try leaving the petticoat on my floor for a couple days, periodically steaming it and moving it around so it has a chance to spread out and hopefully refluff. But I don't know. I'm just feeling really kind of worried about it because I've invested so much time into the skirt. And I like how this skirt looks so much that if it ends up not working out because of a petticoat that I also put a lot of work into, that would be really disappointing. So I did a fitting of this last night and it didn't go that well either. It was just really big in a lot of spots and it didn't sit nicely over the front in the way I'd hoped. The alterations I have to make to this are making the waistline a little bit longer in the back and taking in a whole bunch of the seams and darts. So hopefully I can do this quickly and then maybe I can get this jacket cut out today. The hooks are sewn on, so now it's time to tackle the Modesty panels, and I think I'm going to make them out of the fabric I cut off the back of the skirt yesterday. I should have enough left over from those to accomplish it. So it's been a little while since I updated you guys. I made the Modesty panels for the Civil War era dress, but I haven't sewn them in place yet. Instead, I chose to sew together the cotton back panel and the sheer panel for the 1790s yellow dress I have in progress. I hemmed the front panel by hand with whip stitches so you can't see any visible top stitching, and then the back panel that you won't really end up seeing was hemmed by machine. I also gathered down the waistband, and I did a pretty poor job of this since you won't end up seeing it, So now it's ready to be sewn on. And before doing this, I'm going to really quickly reinforce the sleeve seams on the bodice because I don't really like how I sewed them on the first time around. That shouldn't take me very long, and then I can get this sewn on and get that dress finished. I got the skirt sewn in, so I think now it's time to try this on, and I think I'm going to try it on over top of a petticoat and see how that looks because the front panel is quite sheer and I didn't add a lining to it. So the petticoat will add some modesty. So I just tried on the yellow dress and the end result was not great. I've already blogged about this project and talked a little bit about my struggles with it. The bodice for this was one of those things that I couldn't really see how it looked until it was completed. And since I didn't make a mock-up, I didn't realize how unflattering it would be once it was done. So I wasn't really happy with the top half of this costume, but it was at a point where I just figured I might as well finish it since I'd invested so much time into it already. So with that being said, I think it looks pretty good. It's just really not what I'd hoped it would be when I started on the project. So that's kind of disappointing. As for the front panel, it's too long. So that isn't great, but that's an easy fix and I should still be able to have this finished by the end of the day. Speaking of finishing things, I think I'll be able to finish my Civil War era evening gown today, which should be really, really exciting, but since I've had so many issues with the petticoat and I'm still not sure it's going to work out, I'm not feeling as enthused about completing it as I want to be. So I just sewed the modesty panel into the skirt and the bodice, and I think that's it for this project. As I said earlier, I'm still feeling kind of, I don't know, not super psyched about this because I'm not sure how well the petticoat's going to work out and if it will look good once it's worn, but I'm so happy I have this finished. I've been working on this project for so long and it's been my dream dress for like 3 years, so getting it finished is really exciting. And aside from the petticoat, I'm really happy with how all the detail work turned out. Just the way these fabrics look together and everything is better than I could have imagined, and I'm really, really happy that I decided to make this. And I decided to wait to make it until I had the skills to do it justice. So I'm very, very happy with this project, and now I need to figure out something else sparkly and exciting because I'm going to miss not having some sort of obnoxious frilly thing to work on. So I just finished cutting out my velvet jacket, and that took me about 40 minutes or half an hour to lay out because the pieces did not want to fit on the fabric, and once I got them all to fit, they were on the wrong grain line, and it was just really annoying. But I managed, and look at how much fabric I have left over to spare. Tons! I could have cut it out all over again. Actually, I think the largest scrap is 2 inches wide and 4 inches long, but that's fine. I don't need very many scraps left over. I just need to get it cut out. So remember that whole I'm gonna make a simple jacket out of a yard of velvet and it's gonna be wonderful thing? Well, I'm still doing that, except it's not gonna be simple because I came up with this brilliant idea to cover it with sequin encrusted filigree designs. You're probably thinking, that's gonna take forever, but think of all the sparkly potential. It's gonna be totally worth it. I hope. The costume I'm basing this jacket off of has filigree designs all over it that are made out of ruched trim, and I think they look really cool and would really bring this jacket to another level and definitely help make it look more like a historical piece since you really don't see detail work like that on modern garments. So I was originally just going to do a little bit at the back, and then I got the brilliant idea to add it to the front and to the sleeves as well. So these two designs are just traced from the piece I'm basing this off of, and they're going to be used on the back and around the collar. And then this piece I drew up to go on the sleeve cuffs. So I think I'm going to go ahead and transfer my designs onto the back of the velvet, and then I can use basting stitches to bring the design to the front of the fabric, and I'll show you how that looks when I'm done. So I traced the designs onto interfacing, and then I got them fused onto the front panels and the back panel. And I have one for the sleeve done out, and I have to do another one for the sleeve, and then partially assemble the sleeves and fuse it on, and then I'll be ready for a bunch of sequining. So that'll probably be a task for tonight. But hello everyone! So I didn't film anything yesterday since I was out for a lot of the day, and when I was home I was working on altering this hat, and I didn't really want to film that since it's going to be part of a tutorial video that will probably go up before this, so I can link it down below if you haven't seen it. This is a hat I purchased from Michael's, and I trimmed it with a bunch of flowers and a feather and a bow, and I lined the interior with some fabric that matches the dress this will be worn with. And speaking of that dress, it's over here. I need to hem the bottom of this, and then I also need to figure out what petticoat to wear it with. I'd really like to photograph this weekend so I can get pictures of what the hat looks like worn, and then they can go up next week in the tutorial video. So So I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's my main priority for today. I'd also like to get a sketch done for an 1880s gown. It's going to be made out of these really pretty green fabrics, and I think it's going to look a lot better in the summer environment with all the green than it will in autumn. So I really want to finish it before fall comes around, and that means I need to get started on it soon, which means I need a design for it first. But as I said, that isn't really my priority today. I need to work on the yellow dress first. I also have this lovely thing, and this is the velvet jacket that I've been sequining, and boy has this taken a long time. I really like the process, it's just really slow. I'd originally planned on using these larger sequins, which would make the process faster, but I thought they looked sort of sloppy, so I decided to use these really tiny silver sequins instead. And I think the design looks really crisp and beautiful. It's just made the process a lot slower. So now the back and front panels are fully embellished with sequins, and I can sew these together and line the jacket and actually try it on, which would be really exciting. And then I'll add boning to some of the seams. So hopefully I can make some progress on this today. I still have the sleeves I need to sequin, so it's not over yet, but I'm more than halfway done. So I just tried sewing the lining into the velvet jacket, and I was doing it in sort of the pillowcase method, where you put the right sides together and then you sew around the edges and turn it the right way out. And it was a disaster. They just did not turn over properly and they looked awful. And then I ripped it out, and since the velvet is quite delicate, there were portions where the velvet was pulled away. So I'd hoped to be able to turn the edges inward manually and then line it with whip stitches and such. But now that that edge is just deteriorated in a lot of points, I don't think I can. I'm thinking about cutting the tabs off in the back, lining them, then sewing them on separately, but I'm going to have to recut out a couple tabs, and I don't know if I have enough fabric left to do that. So it's been a couple days since I've filmed anything, and that's not because I haven't been doing stuff, it's because what I've been doing ended horribly. And though I usually like to include the entire process of constructing things, even the negative bits, because I think it's important to see the entire process, whether it goes well or not, I just didn't want to include 8 minutes of something that ended up being a failure. I would much rather focus on what I'm planning on doing today, which will hopefully go a bit better. It was supposed to be a petticoat for the 1880s, but I ended up making it too short, and I didn't mount the ruffles on a stiff enough backing, and the ruffles are stiffened with interfacing instead of having horsehair in them. So I'm going to remake this in the future when I have enough horsehair to do the ruffles properly and a better suited fabric. And in the meantime, I'm just going to pack it away, and I guess I will work on my 1880s project in a couple months instead of this one. But I do have a new project in mind. I took a day off editing, and then yesterday morning I went through a whole bunch of my costume books and all my Pinterest boards looking for something that I felt enthusiastic about. It's a 1580s or 70s gown, and I'm going to make the bodice like that with poofy sleeves and glittery silver trim that's outlined with beads and lace, and it's going to have a silhouette sort of like that bottom left-hand picture. So I thought I would show you the fabrics for it. I went to Joann's yesterday. I had a $25 off coupon, so I managed to get some upholstery fabric that I really like, and I think this costume's going to have a really pretty palette, and I'm excited to get started on it. So here are the fabrics I decided on. These are ones that I already owned. I have an ivory brocade, and then I have a sparkly woven brocade, and then I have some denim which has a floral pattern in velvet flocking, and I'm going to use that for the bodice and mix it with some black velvet that I already have. I picked up another half yard of that from Joann's. I also picked up 2 yards of this sparkly netting and 4.5 yards of this upholstery fabric, which I'm in love with. I think it's such a neat texture, and I can't wait to work with it. In addition to this, I picked up a couple other things that I'll show you. So while I was looking in the bead section, I came across these things, and they made me think of a headpiece that I could make. It's not going to be historically accurate since I'm using sort of funky materials, but it will be a heart-shaped headpiece and follow the historical silhouette really closely. So I got these, and I'm going to pair them with these fabrics, and I think it's going to be gorgeous. So I might try and get this drafted today, because I'd like to have another hand sewing project to work on. And then I got some gold beads to go with that. And I got a navy zipper and 2 yards of this quilter's cotton in this Starry Night print, which will star in a tutorial that I'll be doing on how to make a rectangle skirt. I got 6 yards of this fabric. It's a quilter's cotton, and it was in the red tag section for $6, and then it was 50% off, and I thought it would make a really pretty historical costume, perhaps something from the 18th century. I don't know, I just really liked it, so I decided to get it. And then I got some broadcloth that was reduced down to $1.50 a yard, and I'm going to use this for an 18th century petticoat. So headpiece planning is done, which means I can get started on this today. I'm kind of conflicted between working on this and the 1560s project. I think I'm going to start draping the 1560s project first, and then I can come back to this a little bit later. So this took me a ridiculously long time, like an hour longer than it should have, but I managed to transfer a pattern from one of Janet Arnold's books onto newsprint, and then I made a whole bunch of alterations since it was 10 inches too large for me. The reason I chose to do this instead of drafting it myself is because it has a kind of unique seaming to it and a really interesting color pattern that I wanted to try out, and I didn't think I could draft as well as she did. So I'm going to give this a try, and if it fails then I can just drape a new pattern, but I'm hopeful that this will work. So I got the headpiece drafted. This was quite a doozy to draft. It gave me a lot of trouble, but it's done now, and I'm going to transfer it to a thicker paper, and then I can get the interfacing for this cut out. So I transferred the pattern onto paper, and then I cut the pattern out from heavyweight interfacing. I'm not feeling super confident about this, but I'm going to try and get all the wire sewn into this today, and then I can pin it together later on tonight and see if it could potentially turn into something wearable that looks good. So I got all the pieces trimmed with wire, and now I'm going to try and pin it together to see what it looks like when it's worn, and then I'll move forward from there. I think the cones, which are these large portions, might need another band of wire going there to just reinforce them so they keep their shape a little bit better, but I don't want to go to the effort of doing that if the shape is really bad. So that's why I'm going to try and pin it together first before putting any more time into this. So I did a quick little try on, and it was sort of hard to pin things together, so I couldn't get a really great grasp on how it will look when it's finished. But I definitely like the shape of the cones, and that's the most important part. And the cones have to be finished before they're attached to the rest of the headpiece. So I'm going to move forward with these, and then once they're done and partially sewn together, I'll probably baste it to the other pieces and see how they look all together and then reevaluate. So last night I got the remaining wire sewn into the cones. You can see the band there, and then there's another band closer to the tip. And then this morning I covered them with batting just to smooth out any sort of bumps or lumps in the interfacing because there were quite a few. And I'm actually really happy with the end result. I think they look really good, and I kind of held them up to my head, and I think the shape is really cool. So I'm definitely going to move forward with these, though the more I work on them, the more skeptical I am that the rest of my pattern is going to work out, so I do think there will be some redrafting in the future. So as far as getting them covered goes, I still haven't decided if I want to cover them while they're flat or cover them after sewing up this back seam when they're in cone shapes. They're a lot sturdier when they're sewn into cones or when they're like pinned into cones like this is now, but it also makes certain areas harder to work on because you can't really get your fingers all the way up here. As for the 16th century pattern, I tried it on last night and it wasn't very successful. There were a lot of things wrong with it, so I had to make some major alterations to the pattern. And now I'm going to make a second mock-up, which I very rarely do, just to make sure it fits before moving forward with the real thing. So here is the cone design that I'm going to go with. I have a sketch over there, and portions of this are going to be quilted and striped and made from different fabrics and fabrics with different overlays, so it will obviously look a lot better than this. But so I went ahead and turned the draped pattern into a pattern that can actually be cut out to create the overlay for the horns. And I also figured out what design and which fabrics I want to use for each layer. And you'll notice that I've only left 1/4 inch seam allowances, and I'm hoping that will make it easier to sew these curves. I'm going to cut these out and try assembling it and see what that looks like. So I have the 2 smallest tiers done, and now I have 4 or 5 left to go. And I've made quite a mess of things just playing around with materials and seeing how they layer together, but I think I'm on the right track. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out the rest of the layers and keep on sewing. So I've gotten all the pieces cut out, and then I sewed the overlays onto the according pieces. This ended up taking longer than I was expecting since I wasn't originally planning for each piece to have an overlay, but I felt like the glittery mesh added a lot to the texture of these fabrics. And now I just have to sew these all together and then repeat it on these strips for the other side. Look, I did it! I actually don't love how they look now that they're sewn together as much as I was expecting to. I think all the textures kind of blend together instead of like looking really cool against each other. But I'm hoping once I bead these seam lines between them, you'll see more distinction and it will just look more interesting, I guess. That's my hope at least. So this is what I've spent my morning doing. I took the 16th century pattern and transferred it onto a new sheet of paper, which is the larger pattern piece right there. Then I cut the pattern apart and turned it into 11 pieces, which will make up the pattern on the bodice, because the bodice is going to have a chevron sort of print at the front and back. So it's made up of lots of different pieces of material, and then there will be lace in between each piece. Then there's also a strip at the back and a strip at the front that are made out of different types of fabric and edged with piping. So this pattern is going to be used as the base, and I'm going to put a little bit of boning in that, and it will be the structure for everything else. And then this will be assembled and sit over top of it and be sewn down and beaded and all that good stuff. So I'm quite excited to get working on this, and hopefully I can get it all cut out today, though I'm not sure if I'll be able to get it assembled before the day is up. I got the piece stretched over the interfacing, and then I sewed the interfacing into a cone. It doesn't look super pretty from the back, but it's going to be covered, so it's fine. And then the edge is just whip stitched to the interfacing on the interior. I've also gone through and with the pencil marked out the quilting design and the stripes onto the various panels, so I'll zoom in and show you that. I know the lighting isn't great, but hopefully you can see that. Now the next step is beading across those lines and also beading in between each strip of fabric. I'm going to use a mixture of pearls and silver seed beads, which should look really cool. So that's going to be a downstairs hand sewing task, which will probably take me a day or two to get done, but it should be fun. I haven't had a project to work on like this in quite a while, so I'm really looking forward to it. This costume has so many pieces! But I got the bodice and collar pattern completely cut out. These pieces are all cut out from various black fabrics, and then the base layer is cut out from denim, and then the layers that will be trimmed with a contrasting fabric are cut out from black, because the contrasting fabric I'm using is kind of sheer, so it needs a base. So it's been a productive morning. I got the denim layer of the bodice assembled and did a quick fitting with it, and it seems to fit really nicely. So then I went ahead and sewed on the collar, and I added a few pieces of boning. So now that this is done, I can go ahead and assemble these things. I didn't want to do any assembly until I was sure the bodice fits, but now that I have confirmation of that, I can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to sew all of these together, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. And I also got some major work done on the medieval headpiece, so I want to show you that as well. These are the materials I'm using. I have some seed beads that are pink, I have some 5mm ivory fake pearls, some 4mm peach colored fake pearls, some seed beads in this champagne color, and then I have some iridescent flat sequins. So here's the cone that I finished beading. There's going to be piping along this edge, and then there will be pearls on top of the piping. I'm just waiting till I finish the other one to do that. So far I'm pretty happy with how this looks. I think the beading added a lot of dimension to it, and I really like how all the fabrics look together now, and I think it's going to look awesome when it's done. So my goal for today is to get this one finished. I think it will probably take me about 4 hours, so as long as I don't do any editing this afternoon, I should be able to accomplish it. Ta-da! So I sewed together all the panels, and I was originally going to put a lace in between each strip, but I pinned it without the lace by accident, and when I was looking at it laid out, I really liked how it looked. I like the subtle contrast between the pieces and the materials without the stark ivory lace between them, but I do still plan on putting a row of beading in between each stripe because I think that will look nice. Now I have to decide what to do for the contrasting trim. I have this fabric, which I was originally going to use, but I think it's a little bit stark, like there's too much contrast, and then this one I think there's too much contrast, so I might try overlapping them and see how that looks. I also have to decide if I'm going to trim it with piping or if I'm going to trim it with some of this lace. So lots of little decisions to make before moving forward. Hopefully it won't take me too long. So yesterday I got the contrasting panels cut out, and then this morning I turned the edges inward and sewed them down. Now I have to cut out and assemble piping for them, and I'm going to make the piping out of velvet, and since that's going to get my desk covered in little velvet fibers, I think I should probably also evaluate the velvet jacket that I made earlier in the week and hit a roadblock on and ended up just ignoring. I'm hoping I will have enough fabric left to cut out the tabs at the bottom of the jacket, line them separately, and then sew them onto the body of the jacket. And if I don't have enough fabric to do that, then I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. but I'm gonna have to figure it out because I do want to finish that project soon. So I pulled out the velvet jacket and I didn't have enough fabric to recut out the tabs, so I decided to just hem them by turning the edges inward, and the end result looks kind of blocky and uneven, but for the most part I'm really happy with it and I'm glad that I managed to salvage this project. The reason it's so uneven is because in a lot of them I just didn't have the option to make them even. Because of the way things were ripped out, some of the pieces only have like a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch of seam allowance at points and others have half an inch. So it was really sort of frustrating because of that. But it looks way better than I was expecting when I originally had this problem. So I'm really pleased and now I'm excited to move forward with this project. I think I am going to set it aside for now, but I'll definitely be more motivated to work on finishing the sequin design on the sleeves and maybe figuring out a pattern for the skirt. So I got piping sewn onto one of the contrasting fabric panels for the 16th century costume. Unfortunately, I didn't end up making enough piping for the back panels, so I'll have to do that later today. But I did make enough piping for the medieval headpiece. So I think I'm going to work on that headpiece. Look what I finished! They're not completely done. This one still doesn't have piping on it and neither of them are lined, but all the beading and embellishment work is finished and I love how they turned out. I think they look really cool and I'm really excited to get the rest of the headpiece finished and to get it all put together. I also got the piping onto the contrasting panels for the 16th century bodice. I haven't sewn the lace on yet, it's just pinned in place, but I can do that tonight and then I can start getting this sewn together, which will be really exciting. But I'm actually going to cut the video off here because when I loaded the footage into iMovie last night, I had an hour and a half of footage, which is just ridiculous. So I think it's time to wrap this up and finish the video off with a very short reflection section on what I got done this week.
And that's it. So this was a very productive couple of weeks. I finished my Civil War era ball gown, which was a huge project, and I'm so happy to have that finished. I know I didn't seem very happy in this video because I was so disappointed about the silhouette, but after trying it on and getting photos of it, I was so pleased and I felt like a magical princess, and I was really, really happy with how it looked. So I'm very pleased to have that done. Even though I didn't love how the 1790s dress came out, I'm happy that I finished that, and I ended up really liking how it looked in photos. So that was fun. I finished the hat that went along with that project, and I also started on a new horned slash medieval slash heart-shaped headpiece, which has been a lot of fun to work on. I've actually completed that project since filming this video, and I'm thrilled with how it turned out. It's so girly and ridiculous and inaccurate, but I love it. And I'm actually pretty pleased with how my 1580s bodice and 1890s jacket are coming along. I know the progress you saw in this video wasn't necessarily the most positive, but I figured out how to overcome all the issues I was having with those projects, and I'm feeling pretty enthusiastic about working on them. The only thing that went really badly was that petticoat, which I edited out the process of making. I'm sort of bummed about that, but at the same time, not everything is going to turn out amazingly, and some things are going to turn out really badly, and that's just part of learning. So I'm trying not to beat myself up too hard over that, and instead I'm going to focus on the wins I had this week, which definitely include finishing those 2 projects and working on my headpiece. So I think that's it for this video. Like I said at the beginning, definitely check out the description box for links to my previous progress logs, as well as more information on the projects mentioned in this video. And I really hope you enjoyed. I shall talk to you all very soon.